Battle at Chorwon, Filipino Rifle Company versus Chinese night assault. Imagine hearing the screams of mortars cutting through a moonless sky. The Filipino Rifle Company alone in the dark hills of Chorwon. Suddenly, Chinese soldiers surge forward under the cover of night. No reinforcements, no retreat, only courage, fear, and a desperate fight to survive. This is a story almost forgotten until now. Chapter 1. Nightfall over Chorwon, setting the scene. The sky draped itself in ink. No moon, no stars, just heavy clouds that opened only to spit rain. Chorwon, a quiet valley by day, a deadly trap by night. The wind carried whispers, distant footsteps, gun clicks, hushed orders. In 1952, Chorwon was one of the most dangerous places on Earth. On the front line, under the United Nations command, Filipino soldiers held key hills, rugged, frozen, badly supplied. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army, PVA, were prowling, masters of the night. Their favorite tactic? Sudden attacks in darkness when defenders could barely breathe, let alone aim. Now picture Filipino riflemen dug into cold, frozen soil, their trenches clawed into the earth, their breath steaming, fingers numb, their hearts pounding, every sound magnified. Rustle in the woods, a stone tumbling down slope, the soft snap of a twig. Artillery roared in the distance, illuminating the sky in bursts of orange. Flares shot up, shrapnel rained. These men, young, some teenagers, others hardened veterans, were tasked to hold their ground. They knew that once darkness came, visibility plunged. They also learned the Chinese would use it, creeping forward, creeping silently, flanking and infiltrating. On the other side, hundreds, maybe more, of Chinese soldiers advanced, hidden in folds of terrain, camouflaged, disciplined, moving like shadows. Their plan: hit hard, hit fast, and crush the defenders before dawn. In that moment, time slowed. Fear sharpened every sense, every pulse, every dripping drop of rain. Every breathing soldier counted. This is not a story of big armies or famous generals. This is the story of the Filipino Rifle Company, outmanned, outgunned, out in the dark, and whether they could withstand the night. A young rifleman whispered to his buddy, "If I die, please tell Mama I did not leave the line." His voice cracked, but he held firm. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Who do you think will make it until dawn? Your support means I can bring more untold stories like this. Chapter 3. The First Assault. Shock, Chaos, and Loss. Night was at its deepest. The moon hid, clouds swallowed light. In trenches around Chorwon and near strategic hills like Hill Erie and Hill 181, Filipino sentries strained their eyes in the dark, barely seeing their own hands. Suddenly, a whistle, a burst of flares. The Chinese artillery opened up, mortar shells screaming, shaking earth, tearing through frozen air. Sparks flashed, machine guns roared. A wave of shadowy shapes surged forward through broken wire and under dim flares. The defenders fired back, bullets sparking in the dark, rifles cracking. Some bullets thudded into frozen wood, others bit through cold ground. The first Chinese assault had begun. In the darkness, confusion reigned. Flashlights banned, shells falling, cries of medic, grenade echoed. Filipino soldiers scrambled to their positions. Some lost their footing in mud, ice, or blood. Others ducked under barbed wire. A flare overhead lit the outlines of enemy soldiers moving like ghosts across no man's land. Tracer rounds left red arcs in the sky. This was not a planned attack. It was raw, brutal, terrifying. The Chinese were using the night to their advantage. Silent infiltration, surprise flank attacks, grenades lobbed into trenches. One company, maybe around 100–150 men, found their machine gun post under direct assault from two sides. A Chinese squad dropped grenades at their feet. The Filipinos threw back their own, fired down the slope, pulled fallen comrades out of mud. They held. At Hill Erie, a separate but related action, Lieutenant Fidel V. Ramos and his 44-man reconnaissance platoon had earlier crept across rice pads, crawling through darkness, inching toward their target. They avoided open ground, hugging embankments. When dawn was about to break, orders came. Fighters, sabers in the sky, dropped their bombs. Then artillery pummeled Chinese bunkers. The Filipinos surged forward. When the smoke cleared, they were locked in hand-to-hand combat in trenches, grenades tossed, bayonets flashing. Back in Chorwon's ridges, the Filipino Rifle Company felt the impact. Men wounded, some killed outright. The cold was no friend. Frostbite added pain. Rain made rifles sticky. Mud clogged boots. They could hear Chinese voices, men shouting orders, laughing, taunting. But they had their own voices too. Prayers recited in whispers, names called out, bullets passed from hand to hand. Each man tried to hold his corner of the line, no matter how alone. One soldier lay wounded, his face pale, slipping in and out of consciousness. A comrade dragged him behind a sandbagged wall, wrapped him in blanket scraps. Another soldier, hearing the call, rushed forward to cover that flank, even though he was half lost in darkness and slippery earth. A flare ignited overhead, a blast of white light. In that moment, the enemy charge was revealed. Dozens of Chinese soldiers pouring over a crest, silhouetted against the sky. The Filipinos opened up with rifles and machine guns. A deadly crossfire erupted. The assailants dropped. Some tumbled back, others pressed on. It felt like the edge of doom, but the defenders held, inch by inch. At Hill Erie, Ramos's platoon seized barbed wire entanglements, punched into trench lines, and destroyed enemy bunkers. But loss was not absent. One Filipino was injured, some were stunned by the blasts and smoke. But momentum shifted. By dawn, control of key bunkers had been won. In the Chorwon sector, the rifle company could see the first signs of dawn. Chinese forces, having borne heavy casualties, began to pull back or regroup. The Filipino line was battered, bloodied, shaken, but still unbroken. They caught their breath, they tended wounds, they gathered ammo, and they waited, because they knew this might only be just the beginning.
Chapter 4. Turning the Tide. Heroism, counterattack, and sacrifice. Dawn was still hours away, but something inside the Filipino Rifle Company shifted. Exhaustion, fear, cold, they were real. But so was resolve. Against all odds, the defenders, some wounded, many sleepless, began to push back. In the west of Chorwon, on Hill Erie, the 20th Philippine Battalion Combat Team, PEFTOK, prepared a daring counterattack. The Chinese had held parts of the hill for weeks. It was heavily fortified, trenches, wire, bunkers. But the Filipinos had something fearsome, courage and coordination. Enter Lieutenant Fidel V. Ramos, a young officer fresh from West Point whose name would one day be known across nations. On 21 May 1952, Ramos, under orders, led the 44-man 2nd Reconnaissance Platoon to reclaim the Chinese positions on Hill Erie. They began just before dawn, crawling through rice paddies, damp with dew, through scattered trees, across cold, sloppy ground. 2 hours of advance in near silence. Around 400 meters from the crest, a wall of barbed wire and earthworks loomed. Ramos and his men had to find a way in. Then came the thunder. F-86 Sabre jets from the U.S. Air Force streaked overhead, dropping napalm, followed by sharp artillery strikes. Explosions lit the sky. the wire in front of them shredded. And then, with hearts pounding, Ramos gave the signal. The rifle teams, snipers, scouts all moved forward. Close-quarter combat erupted. Filipino riflemen and Chinese defenders traded fire at point-blank range. Bayonets flashed. Trenches became killing zones. Sergeant Soprano Drapez's rifle team flanked left. The sniper team held eastern support from Hill 191. Scouts scurried through blown gaps in wire. Despite their numbers, despite the fire, despite fatigue, they gained ground. One Filipino soldier almost fell, wounded in the flank by shrapnel. Another dragged him back, blood-soaked but determined. A young medic, though terrified, patched up bleeding arms and legs under enemy fire. Fear was still there, but action replaced paralysis. Each man held a patch of ground. Each shouted for the fallen. Each rose again when knocked down. Heroes were forged in smoke and mud. By 07:28 a.m., the Filipinos had demolished the PVA bunkers on the hill's forward edge and pulled back before counterfire could overwhelm them. They didn't hold that seized crest indefinitely. The mission was sabotage, disruption, proving what a small force, unified, could do. But their success reverberated across the front. They paid dearly. There were injuries, losses, faces changed, but they had turned the tide in that sector. The assault, though brief, showed that the piercing darkness, despite its terrors, could be challenged. Light could come. There were sacrifices, some lives lost, some bodies wounded, but also moments of extraordinary bravery. Soldiers refusing to leave wounded comrades, medics volunteering into open ground, leaders like Ramos showing that even in overwhelming odds, choice matters. Meanwhile, in other sectors, Chorwon ridges, Hill 191, Hill 200, Filipino companies held firm. Chinese night raids and artillery barrages continued, but every resisted attack, every regained trench, every shout in the dark was a morale boost. The defenders were no longer just waiting, they were fighting back. They were no longer broken, they were defiant. As the dawn's first light crept over Erie Hill, the hills glowed with pale gold. The stench of gunpowder, smoke, wet earth filled the air. The Chinese lines battered, pulled back to regroup. Filipino soldiers, icy, starving, exhausted, looked up at the sky and knew they had survived the night. They had changed the shape of the fight. A wound, yes, but not a defeat, not tonight. Chapter 5. After Dawn, Legacy, Reflection, and Lessons. Light at last crept over Erie Hill. The pale sun couldn't wash away the mud or blood, but it revealed what had been defended with such courage. The ridges, trenches, wire, they bore witness. The defenders were tired, wounded, some grieving, and yet they stood. Filipino forces of the 20th Battalion Combat Team had secured a hard-earned victory. On 21 May 1952, 44 men, led by Lieutenant Fidel V. Ramos, successfully sabotaged key Chinese bunkers on Hill Erie, then withdrew but signaled something powerful. Small numbers, when brave and coordinated, can make history. A short anecdote of Lieutenant Fidel V. Ramos. Then there was Lieutenant, later President Fidel Ramos. In May 1952, Ramos led 44 soldiers in a pre-dawn assault on Erie Hill. Before they moved, he gathered them in silence. He prayed, "May God protect us," he said. Then they crawled through rice paddies, crossed riverbanks slick with mud and frost to reach enemy bunkers that had withstood 6 previous attacks. Ramos later said that he saw a Chinese soldier about to pull the pin of a grenade aimed at his flank. He had no choice. He fired. Lives, perhaps, were saved by that split-second choice. It was more than just taking a hill. It was about hope, about pride. For the soldiers, knowing that families thousands of miles away would hear their names, that medals and honors would follow, yes, but deeper, they had proven their resolve. The Philippines, still rebuilding after past conflicts, showed its soldiers could stand under fire, could push forward under impossible odds. The cost was real. Lives lost, wounds both seen and unseen. Many Filipino soldiers returned home with scars, stories that few wanted to hear, nightmares of the night's artillery, the close-quarter fights, the fear in comrades' eyes. But those stories also held something else: inspiration, the kind that leads young people to study bravery, that leads nations to remember sacrifice. Veteran Raimundo Lanel Bumatay, who served near Hill 191 and Hill 200, later reflected on those times. He was honored decades later with the Philippine Gold Medal Peace Award for his fighting in Erie and Chorwon. A short anecdote of Raimundo Bumatay. Raimundo Bumatay from Company I of the 19th BCT later recalled how every 30 minutes he felt the cannon blast from the North Koreans like the earth itself was crying. He said that when his mortar crew was ordered into hand-to-hand combat, that moment when rifles weren't enough and a man had to fight with a bayonet or even his bare hands, he held tight to thoughts of home, his mother's lullaby, letters waiting in Manila. Stories echoed in families. In letters, "Mama, we just held another hill. I hope to see you again." In veterans' memories, flares, frozen nights, comrades lost, but also a song once played in a bunker, the shared laughter when daylight came. Today, Hill Erie is one of the remembered names in the Korean War history. UN victory. It helped cement the legacy of PEFTOK, the Philippine Expeditionary Forces to Korea, as more than just contributors, but as warriors who shaped parts of the war. There are lessons still relevant. When darkness surrounds, hope can be a lamp in the hearts of those determined to stand. Leadership matters. Lieutenant Ramos's calm under fire, his planning, his men doing their duty even when voices shook. The power of unity, of small groups working tightly together, and that sacrifice does not vanish. It echoes in history books, in medals, in peace forged afterward. If you walk through the Korean War memorials today in South Korea or the Philippines, you'll see Hill Erie marked, names etched, photos, medals, and descendants who visit, veterans who remember. Some of those young men who crawled through rice paddies, who faced flares in frozen night skies, they left an inheritance: courage, duty, memory. So when you look up at a night sky, when darkness seems overpowering, maybe think of those 44, those 150, those thousands who held their line. Think of the frozen hills, the barbed wires, the flare light, the prayers whispered, because it matters, even after dawn. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe if you haven't yet, and leave a comment what part of this story hit you hardest. Knowing you're with us keeps these heroes from being forgotten. Share this video so more people learn of the bravery in the darkness. Thank you so much for staying with me in the Battle of Chorwon. Remember,